The blood-stained dirt beneath Olivia Parker's palms told a story of violence that the fading light of dusk couldn't hide. Her desperate crawl toward freedom leaving crimson trails on the parched earth of Copper Ridge, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1878. Her vision blurred as consciousness threatened to abandon her, the beating she'd received at the hands of Silas Jenkins still reverberating through her broken body. All because she had refused to follow his orders, refused to become another of his working girls at the Red Feather Saloon. Ethan Nash pulled back on the reins of his chestnut stallion, Rusty, his keen eyes catching the unusual movement along the side of the dusty trail leading out of town. As a cattle driver who'd seen his share of death and hardship in his 27 years, he'd learned to notice details others might miss. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the land, but there was no mistaking the shape of a human form struggling in the dirt. "Easy, boy," he murmured to his horse as he dismounted, his worn boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip as he approached cautiously. What he found made his blood run cold. A woman, her face almost unrecognizable beneath the bruises and blood, her simple blue dress torn and dirty, lay barely moving in the dirt. Her eyes flickered open at his approach, deep brown eyes filled with terror. "Don't, please," she whispered, attempting to crawl away despite her injuries. Ethan crouched down, keeping a respectful distance. "Madam, I ain't gonna hurt you, I swear on my mother's grave." He removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "Whoever did this to you, they need to answer for it." The woman's eyes rolled back as she lost her tenuous hold on consciousness. Ethan knew he had to act fast. He gently lifted her broken form, noting with anger the extent of her injuries. Someone had beaten her mercilessly, with purpose. In his years on the frontier, he'd seen the dark side of humanity more times than he cared to remember. But this senseless brutality against a defenseless woman made his jaw clench with rage. With careful movements, he placed her on his horse, then mounted behind her, supporting her limp form against his chest. The nearest town with a proper doctor was Silver Creek, a day's ride north. Copper Ridge had nothing but a barber who pulled teeth and set simple fractures. This woman needed real medical attention. "Hang on, madam," he whispered, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I'm getting you somewhere safe." As Ethan rode through the gathering darkness, he couldn't help but wonder what this woman had done to deserve such treatment, or rather, what someone had convinced themselves she'd done. In his experience, victims rarely deserved their fate. The frontier was unforgiving to women without protection, and whatever her story was, he was determined to see her safely through this night. The journey to Silver Creek was arduous. Ethan stopped twice to make camp, carefully tending to the unconscious woman's wounds with water from his canteen and strips torn from his spare shirt. She stirred occasionally, mumbling incoherently, flinching away from his touch even in her unconscious state. It broke something in him to see such fear. By the time they reached Silver Creek, the sun was rising on the second day. The small mining town was just waking up, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery. Ethan rode straight to the doctor's house at the edge of town, a modest two-story building with a small sign reading Dr. Frederick Wilson, physician. He dismounted carefully, cradling the woman in his arms as he kicked at the door with his boot. The door swung open to reveal a middle-aged man with spectacles perched on his nose and suspenders over his white shirt. "What in tarnation?" Dr. Wilson started before his professional instincts took over. "Bring her in, quickly." Ethan followed him inside to a small examination room. Found her outside Copper Ridge. Someone beat her something terrible. She's been in and out of consciousness for nearly a day now. Dr. Wilson's face grew grave as he examined her. This is deliberate work, not a drunken brawl or accident. His fingers gently probed the woman's swollen face. Several broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, broken nose, and these defensive wounds on her hands. He looked up at Ethan. "You know her?" "No, sir. Just found her trying to crawl away from town. Couldn't leave her there." The doctor nodded. "You did right. My nurse will be here shortly. You can wait in the front room." Hours passed as Ethan waited, his hat in his hands, turning it absently as he stared at the closed door. He should be on his way. He had cattle waiting at a ranch outside Prescott, and his employer wouldn't take kindly to delays. But something about the woman's desperate attempt to escape, the terror in her eyes when she'd momentarily regained consciousness, it held him there. The doctor emerged eventually, wiping his hands on a towel. She'll live, but it was close. Someone wanted to teach her a lesson without killing her. Professional job, if you ask me. Professional, Ethan stood. The kind of beating that causes pain without quickly proving fatal. She has a dislocated shoulder, 4 broken ribs, a broken nose, and more bruises than I can count, but nothing that won't heal with time. She's awake now, but weak. Says her name is Olivia Parker. Olivia, Ethan repeated softly. She say what happened. The doctor's expression darkened. She worked at the Red Feather in Copper Ridge. Apparently the owner, Silas Jenkins, was forcing the serving girls into prostitution. She refused, so he had his men demonstrate the consequences of disobedience. Ethan's hand instinctively moved to his gun. Jenkins, I know that name, runs half the crooked games between here and Tucson. She's terrified he'll find her. Says he told her if she ever tried to run, he'd track her to the ends of the earth. Ethan's jaw set in a hard line. Can I see her? The doctor hesitated. She's frightened of men right now, understandably, but perhaps knowing who rescued her might help. He led Ethan to a small recovery room where Olivia Parker lay on a narrow bed. Her face was clean now, but the bruising had darkened to purples and blacks that stood in stark contrast to her pale skin. Her light brown hair had been combed and braided to keep it out of her face, and her eyes, those same deep brown eyes, watched the door with apprehension. Miss Parker, Dr. Wilson said gently, this is the man who found you and brought you here, Mr. Nash, Ethan supplied. Ethan Nash. Olivia's wary gaze held his. Despite her injuries, he could see she had once been beautiful and would be again when the swelling subsided. There was a strength in those eyes that the beating hadn't extinguished. Thank you, Mr. Nash, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, cracked and dry. The doctor says I would have died out there if you hadn't come along. Ethan stepped forward slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. Any decent person would have done the same, Miss Parker. A ghost of a smile touched her swollen lips. We both know that's not true, Mr. Nash. Not out here. There was a wisdom in her words that spoke of harsh lessons learned. Ethan knew she was right. The West was not always kind, and many would have ridden past rather than involve themselves in a stranger's troubles. You're safe now, he said, though he knew the words might ring hollow. A woman alone on the frontier was never truly safe. As if reading his thoughts, Olivia's eyes filled with tears. He'll find me. Silas doesn't let anyone go, especially not someone who's defied him. Ethan made a decision then that would alter the course of his life, though he didn't yet realize it. Not if he can't find you. Once you're well enough to travel, I'll take you somewhere he won't look. Dr. Wilson cleared his throat. That's very generous, Mr. Nash, but Miss Parker will need at least a week before she can travel, and even then, it should be in a wagon, not on horseback. Then I'll wait and find a wagon. Ethan's tone made it clear the matter was settled. Later, As Ethan arranged for a room at the local boarding house, he wondered at his own actions. He'd never been one to get involved in others' problems, preferring the solitary life of a cattle driver. But something about Olivia Parker's courage in the face of such brutality had stirred something in him, a protective instinct he hadn't felt since his younger sister died of fever years ago. For the next week, Ethan split his time between checking on Olivia and earning enough money to buy supplies for their journey. He found work at the livery stable, grooming horses and repairing tack, and sent a telegram to his employer explaining the delay, crafting a story about a family emergency. He wasn't sure why he lied, perhaps, because he knew most men wouldn't understand risking a job for a stranger. Olivia improved steadily under Dr. Wilson's care. By the fourth day, she could sit up without assistance, though the pain still etched lines around her mouth when she moved too quickly. Ethan visited her each evening, bringing her small gifts, a book of poetry from the general store, fresh berries from a bush he found while hunting, a small carved wooden bird he'd made during the quiet hours at the stable. At first, their conversations were halting, awkward. Olivia was guarded, her trust shattered by her experiences at the Red Feather. But gradually, as the days passed, she began to open up. "I came west after my parents died," she told him one evening as they sat in the doctor's small garden, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I had an aunt in Copper Ridge who offered me a home, but she passed from consumption just 3 months after I arrived. I needed work, and the Red Feather was hiring serving girls." "Silas Jenkins didn't mention his expectations at first?" Ethan asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. Olivia shook her head, wincing slightly at the movement. "No, for the first month it was just serving drinks, clearing tables. Then one of the girls disappeared. When I asked about her, Martha, one of the older girls, told me she'd been promoted." A bitter smile twisted her lips. "That's what they called it, promotion." Ethan's hands tightened around his hat. "And when your turn came, I refused." Her eyes took on a faraway look. "I'd rather starve than sell myself. Silas said he'd invested too much in me room and board for a month and I owed him. When I still refused, he had 2 of his men hold me down while he—" Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. "You don't need to tell me more," Ethan said softly. "No, I want to. I need someone to know." She took a shaky breath. "He beat me himself. Said he wanted to make sure I understood my place. Then he locked me in the cellar for 2 days without food, just water. When he came back, he asked if I was ready to be obedient." Her eyes met Ethan's, fierce despite her injuries. I spat in his face. The pride in her voice made something warm unfurl in Ethan's chest. "That's when they did this to you," she nodded. "His men this time. Silas just watched. When they were done, they dragged me to the edge of town and left me there as a message to the other girls. I managed to crawl a little way before you found me." The courage it must have taken to defy Jenkins not once, but twice, knowing the consequences, humbled Ethan. He'd thought himself brave for facing down rustlers and the occasional barroom brawl, but this woman possessed a different kind of bravery altogether. "Where will we go?" she asked, changing the subject. "When I'm well enough." Ethan had been considering this question all week. "I have a friend with a ranch near a town called Pine Valley, about 4 days' journey from here. It's small, out of the way. Jenkins wouldn't think to look there. And this friend will take in a stranger. Samuel owes me his life. He won't turn us away." Ethan didn't elaborate on how he'd pulled Samuel from a burning barn during a lightning storm 2 years prior. On the 7th day, Dr. Wilson declared Olivia fit for travel, though he cautioned her to move carefully and rest frequently. Ethan had purchased a small wagon and a sturdy mule to pull it, outfitting it with blankets and supplies for the journey. As they prepared to depart, the doctor pulled Ethan aside. "She's healing well physically, but the other wounds, the ones you can't see, those will take longer. Be patient with her." Ethan nodded, understanding the unspoken advice. "I will." They left Silver Creek at dawn, Ethan driving the wagon with Olivia seated beside him, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the morning. His horse, Rusty, was tethered to the back of the wagon. The town quickly fell away behind them as they headed northwest, toward the higher country and the pine forests that gave Pine Valley its name. The first day passed uneventfully, though Ethan noticed how Olivia tensed whenever they encountered other travelers on the road. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, and he found a spot by a small stream to rest the animals and take shelter under the shade of a cottonwood tree. As Olivia sipped from a cup of water, she studied Ethan's profile. "You never told me why you're doing this," she said finally. "Taking such a risk for a stranger." Ethan considered the question, watching the play of sunlight through the leaves above them. "My sister, Emma. She was 16 when a group of drifters came through our town in Kansas. One of them took a liking to her. When she refused his advances, he didn't take it well." He paused, the memory still raw even after 8 years. "My pa and I were out hunting. By the time we got back, it was too late. She'd fought back and he'd beaten her badly. She lingered for 3 days before passing." "I'm so sorry," Olivia whispered. "The law did nothing. Said she must have provoked him somehow." His jaw clenched at the memory. "I tracked him for 2 weeks before I found him in a saloon in Wichita, made sure he'd never hurt another woman." The implication hung in the air between them. Ethan had never told anyone this story, not even Samuel. But something about Olivia made him want to share this part of himself, to help her understand why he couldn't ride away. "You see something of your sister in me," she said. It wasn't a question. Maybe. Or maybe I just couldn't stand by and let another man get away with thinking women are property to be beaten into submission. He met her gaze directly. "Either way, I'm here because I choose to be." That night, as they made camp under the vast canopy of stars, Olivia seemed more at ease in his presence. They ate a simple meal of beans and jerky, and Ethan told her stories of his cattle drives to distract her from the pain of her healing wounds. As the fire died down to embers, Olivia wrapped herself in her blanket on the far side of the wagon, while Ethan made his bed on the ground nearby, close enough to protect her if needed, but far enough to respect her space. "Mr. Nash." Her voice drifted through the darkness. "Just Ethan is fine." "Ethan, thank you, not just for saving my life, but for treating me like a person worth saving." Her words stayed with him long after her breathing had evened out in sleep, stirring emotions he'd locked away years ago. He told himself firmly that his interest in Olivia Parker was purely protective, born of a desire to see justice done where his sister had found none. But as he drifted off to sleep beneath the star-strewn sky, even he wasn't fully convinced of that lie. The second day brought them into rougher country, the wagon jostling over rocky terrain that made Olivia wince with each bump, despite the extra padding Ethan had added to the seat. By mid-morning, her face had gone pale with pain, and Ethan called a halt earlier than he'd planned. "We'll rest here a while," he said, helping her down from the wagon. "No need to push too hard." They found shade beneath an overhang of rock, and Ethan set about preparing a cold meal while Olivia rested. As she leaned back against the sun-warmed stone, she studied him openly. "You're different from most men I've met out here," she said. "Kinder." Ethan snorted softly. "Don't go making me out to be some kind of saint. I've done things I'm not proud of. Haven't we all?" There was a wisdom in her voice that belied her 23 years. But it's the choices we make when it matters that define us. Her words caught him off guard. Most people he'd known judged a person by their worst deeds, not their best intentions. That's a generous way of looking at the world, especially after what you've been through. Olivia's gaze drifted to the vast landscape before them, the distant mountains shimmering in the heat. My father was a minister. He taught me that forgiveness is not about excusing the crime, but about preventing it from destroying your heart. A sad smile touched her lips. I'm still working on forgiving Silas Jenkins. Some things might not deserve forgiveness, Ethan said, handing her a plate of cold biscuits and jerky. Perhaps, but I won't let what he did define the rest of my life. She accepted the food with a nod of thanks. What about you? What will you do after you deliver me to your friend's ranch? It was a question Ethan had been avoiding. His job was likely gone by now, and his savings wouldn't last forever. Head to Colorado, maybe. There's always work for a man who knows cattle. No family waiting for you somewhere. Not anymore. My ma passed the year after Emma and my pa followed soon after. Grief can kill as surely as any bullet. Olivia nodded, understanding in her eyes. So we're both alone in the world. Seems that way. They continued their journey after the brief rest, making slower progress as Ethan chose paths that would be easier on Olivia's healing body. By nightfall, they'd covered less ground than he'd hoped, but he reminded himself that getting her there safely was more important than getting there quickly. That night, as they sat by the campfire, Olivia asked him to teach her how to shoot. I had my father's revolver, but I never learned to use it properly, she explained. Silas found it when he searched my things and took it. If I'd known how to use it. Ethan understood her reasoning. We'll start tomorrow. Every person should know how to defend themselves. Morning brought clear skies and cooler temperatures. After a breakfast of coffee and more biscuits, Ethan set up empty cans on a fallen log and handed Olivia his spare revolver, a Smith & Wesson that had belonged to his father. It's smaller than my Colt, might suit your hand better, he explained, showing her how to check that it was loaded. Always treat a gun as if it's loaded, even when you know it isn't. Olivia listened intently as he explained the basics, how to hold it, how to aim, how to control her breathing. Her first shot went wide, the recoil stronger than she'd expected. But by the fifth attempt, she was hitting the target more often than not. You're a natural, Ethan said, genuinely impressed. Most folks take days to get that kind of accuracy. A pleased blush colored her cheeks, the first time he'd seen her truly smile since finding her on that dusty road. It transformed her face, despite the healing bruises, and Ethan found himself wanting to see that smile again. They practiced for another hour before continuing their journey. As they traveled, Olivia seemed more animated, pointing out wildflowers and asking questions about the land they passed through. Ethan found himself enjoying her company, her quick mind and resilient spirit a welcome change from the solitude he'd grown accustomed to. By the third day, they'd entered pine country, the air fragrant with the scent of resin and wildflowers. The higher elevation brought relief from the heat, and Olivia's strength seemed to grow with each mile. They made camp early by a small lake, its surface a perfect mirror reflecting the surrounding mountains. While Ethan set up camp, Olivia wandered to the water's edge, drawn by the tranquil beauty of the place. It's like something from a dream, she said when he joined her. I never imagined places like this existed. The West isn't all dust and danger, Ethan agreed, skipping a stone across the water's surface. There's beauty here too if you know where to look. As the sun began to set, painting the sky and water in shades of gold and crimson, Olivia turned to him with a determined expression. Teach me to skip stones, she said, bending carefully to select a flat pebble from the shore. Ethan showed her the proper technique, his hand guiding hers as she flicked her wrist. Her first attempt sank immediately, drawing a laugh from her that caught him by surprise. It was a clear, joyful sound that seemed to echo across the water. "Try again," he encouraged, finding another suitable stone for her. Her second attempt skipped twice before disappearing beneath the surface, and she clapped her hands in delight. "Did you see that? You're a quick study," Ethan said, enjoying her enthusiasm. They continued until the light faded, returning to camp only when it became too dark to see the stones land. As they sat by the fire, eating a supper of rabbit that Ethan had snared and roasted, a comfortable silence settled between them. "Tell me about your friend's ranch," Olivia said eventually. "The one we're headed to." Samuel Carson runs a small horse breeding operation. Nothing fancy, but he does well enough. Has about 20 acres of good grazing land and a tidy cabin. Ethan poked at the fire with a stick. His wife, Clara, is expecting their first child come winter. "And you're certain they'll take me in?" Samuel and Clara are good people. "Once they hear what happened to you, they won't turn you away." He hesitated, then added, "Besides, Clara's been wanting help around the place with the baby coming." Olivia's expression softened. "That would be nice. To be useful again." She stared into the fire. "I don't want to be a burden to anyone." "You won't be," Ethan assured her. "Samuel's been looking to expand, maybe add a few cattle to his operation. He's mentioned needing someone who knows the business." The idea had been forming in his mind over the past few days. "I could stay on a while, help him get started." The suggestion hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Ethan wasn't sure when his plan had shifted from dropping Olivia off to settling nearby, but he found himself reluctant to leave her behind when they reached Pine Valley. "I'd like that," Olivia said softly, her eyes meeting his across the fire. "To know you were nearby." Something shifted in that moment, a connection forming that transcended their brief acquaintance. Ethan recognized the feeling for what it was, the beginning of something that could grow into more than friendship, but he was careful not to rush. Olivia had been through too much trauma to burden her with his growing affection. The fourth day of travel brought them within sight of Pine Valley, a collection of buildings nestled in a verdant hollow surrounded by pine-covered hills. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer rang through the clear air. "It's lovely," Olivia said as they approached. "Peaceful." "Samuel's place is about 2 miles beyond the town," Ethan explained. "Enough distance for privacy, but close enough for supplies and company when wanted." As they passed through the town, Ethan noted with approval the neat buildings and orderly streets. Pine Valley had been founded by families seeking a quieter life than the mining towns offered, and it had the feel of a place where people put down roots. They reached the Carson Ranch as the afternoon sun began its descent. The cabin was exactly as Ethan remembered it: solid logs chinked with clay, a wide front porch, smoke curling from the stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, and a corral held several fine-looking horses. Samuel Carson emerged from the barn as they approached, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. He shaded his eyes, then broke into a wide grin as he recognized Ethan. "Nash, you old wolf," he called, striding toward them. "What brings you to these parts?" Ethan pulled the wagon to a halt and jumped down to greet his friend with a firm handshake. "Samuel, good to see you. I've brought someone who needs a safe place to stay." Samuel's expression grew serious as he noticed Olivia, her bruises still visible despite the healing that had occurred. "Clara." He called toward the cabin. "We've got company." A petite woman with auburn hair appeared in the doorway, her rounded belly evident beneath her apron. Her welcoming smile faltered slightly as she took in Olivia's condition, but she quickly recovered. "Well, don't just stand there, Samuel Carson. Help the lady down and bring them inside." She descended the porch steps with careful movements. "I'm Clara Carson, and you're welcome here." Ethan helped Olivia from the wagon, noting how she leaned on him more heavily than she had that morning. The journey had taken its toll on her still healing body. "This is Olivia Parker," he said. "She's had a rough time of it, and we're looking for a place where she can recover properly." Clara took one look at Olivia's face and seemed to understand everything without being told. "You poor dear. Come inside and rest. Supper's nearly ready, and we've plenty to share." Inside the cabin, Clara fussed over Olivia, settling her in a comfortable chair near the fire and bringing her a cup of tea while Samuel and Ethan saw to the horses and wagon. By the time the men returned, Clara had drawn the story from Olivia in gentle bits and pieces. Over a hearty supper of venison stew and fresh bread, Ethan explained his idea about helping Samuel expand into cattle breeding, carefully watching his friend's reaction. Samuel exchanged a look with Clara before breaking into a broad smile. "Been hoping you'd settle down somewhere nearby. Got tired of only seeing you once every few years. Then you wouldn't mind if I stayed on a while." Ethan glanced at Olivia, who was watching the exchange with cautious hope. "Mind? We'd welcome it." Samuel leaned forward eagerly. "Been saving to buy a small herd, but wasn't sure how to manage it with the horses and the baby coming. Having someone who knows cattle would be a godsend." Clara reached across to pat Olivia's hand. "And we'd be pleased to have another woman around. This place gets lonely sometimes, and I could use help with the garden and preserving now that I can't bend over so well." Relief washed over Olivia's face. "I'd be happy to help in any way I can. I'm good with a needle too. I could mend and sew for you." "Then it's settled," Samuel declared, raising his cup in a toast. "To new beginnings." That night, Olivia was given the small guest room off the main living area, while Ethan bedded down in the barn loft, a familiar arrangement from his previous visits. As he lay in the darkness, listening to the soft sounds of the horses below, he found himself thinking of the future with a hope he hadn't felt in years. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan and Samuel rode out each day, surveying the land and making plans for expanding the pastures to accommodate cattle. Olivia's strength returned rapidly now that she could rest properly, and she proved to be a valuable help to Clara, whose pregnancy was making household tasks increasingly difficult. In the evenings, the four of them would gather around the table or the hearth, sharing stories and laughter. Ethan found himself watching Olivia during these times, noting how her eyes sparkled when she smiled, how her hands gestured gracefully when she spoke. The bruises on her face faded, revealing the beauty that had been hidden beneath. One evening, about 3 weeks after their arrival, Ethan found Olivia sitting alone on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. He joined her, offering a shawl against the evening chill. "Clara said you were out here," he said, settling onto the step beside her. "Everything all right?" Olivia nodded, drawing the shawl around her shoulders. "Just thinking about how much my life has changed in such a short time. A month ago, I was certain I was going to die on that road." Ethan studied her profile in the moonlight. "And now I feel like I've been given a second chance." She turned to face him, her expression earnest. "I owe that to you, Ethan." "You don't owe me anything," he said firmly. "You survived because you're strong, stronger than Jenkins and his men ever gave you credit for." A small smile curved her lips. "Perhaps. But having someone believe in that strength makes all the difference." She hesitated, then added softly, "I've never met a man like you before, someone who sees me as a person, not a possession." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest at her words. The way I see it, a man who needs to control others is just hiding his own weakness. Is that why you've never married? Too afraid of appearing weak? There was gentle teasing in her voice, but genuine curiosity too. The question caught him off guard. Never found the right woman, I suppose. Or maybe I was too busy moving from one job to the next. And now, her eyes held his, the question hanging between them. Ethan chose his words carefully. Now I'm starting to think there might be reasons to put down roots. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. Samuel and Clara make it look so easy, being partners in everything. They're lucky. Not everyone finds someone who complements them so well. Do you think that's possible for people like us, after everything we've seen and done? Ethan considered the question, watching the play of moonlight on her face. I think happiness finds a way, even for the most damaged souls, maybe especially for them, because they know its true value. Olivia's hand found his in the darkness, her touch light but deliberate. I'd like to believe that. They sat in comfortable silence after that, hands loosely joined, watching the night sky. It wasn't a declaration of love, they were both too cautious for that, but it was an acknowledgement of possibility, of a door left open for whatever might grow between them. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in shades of gold and crimson, Ethan and Samuel traveled to a neighboring ranch to purchase 20 head of cattle. It was a modest beginning, but enough to start building a herd. The day they drove the cattle onto Carson land was a celebration, with Clara baking a special pie and Olivia decorating the table with late wildflowers. That evening, Samuel raised his cup in another toast. To the Nash Carson cattle operation, may it flourish and grow. Ethan found himself oddly moved by the inclusion of his name. It had been years since he'd been part of something permanent, something with a future beyond the next paycheck. Later, as the women cleared the supper dishes, Samuel drew Ethan outside for a private word. "Been meaning to ask you something," Samuel said, lighting his pipe. "That parcel of land adjoining mine to the east, the old Miller place, it's for sale. 100 acres, has its own water source and a cabin that needs work but is solid enough." Ethan waited, sensing there was more coming. "Clara and I were thinking, with the baby coming and the cattle operation expanding, it might make sense for you to consider buying it. Make this arrangement more permanent." Samuel puffed on his pipe. "And it would give Miss Parker a proper place to call home, should things progress in that direction." Heat crept up Ethan's neck. "That obvious, is it?" Samuel chuckled. "Only to anyone with eyes. The way you look at her when you think no one's watching." "Well, let's just say I recognize the symptoms." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Life's too short to waste time, my friend, especially when you find someone worth keeping." The seed planted by Samuel's suggestion took root in Ethan's mind. The Miller property was indeed well situated, and the price was fair. With his savings and the wages Samuel was paying him, he could manage it, though it would leave little to spare for improvements right away. But more importantly, the idea of a place of his own, a home rather than just a stopping point, appealed to him in a way it never had before. And if Olivia were to share that home someday? The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. Ethan had spent so many years avoiding attachments, convinced that life on the move was safer than risking the pain of loss again. But watching Samuel and Clara together, seeing their joy as they prepared for their child, had awakened a longing he'd long suppressed. 2 days later, Ethan rode into town to speak with the banker about the Miller property. The transaction was straightforward, and by midday, he was the owner of 100 acres of good Montana land, complete with a 2-room cabin that needed a new roof and some chinking between the logs. but was otherwise sound. He kept the purchase to himself at first, riding out to the property each day to make repairs while ostensibly checking on the cattle. The work was satisfying, fixing the roof, sealing the chinks, replacing broken window glass. He built shelves and a new table, repaired the stone fireplace, and even constructed a crude but functional bathtub that could be filled with heated water from the nearby spring. By late October, when the first snow dusted the higher elevations, the cabin was ready. Ethan realized it was time to share his plans, at least with Olivia. The future he envisioned required her participation, and he couldn't assume she shared his growing feelings. He chose a Sunday afternoon, when Samuel and Clara had gone to visit neighbors. Olivia was quilting by the window, her nimble fingers working the needle through the colorful fabric squares. "Would you walk with me?" Ethan asked. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity lit her eyes as she set aside her work. "Of course." He helped her into her coat and led her outside to where two horses waited. They rode eastward in comfortable silence, Olivia casting questioning glances his way but not pressing for information. When they crested the rise that overlooked the Miller now Nash property, Ethan reined his horse to a stop. Below them, the cabin stood in a small clearing, smoke rising from the chimney where Ethan had lit a fire earlier to take the chill off the rooms. A stream wound through the property, its banks lined with aspens that shimmered gold in the autumn light. "It's beautiful," Olivia said, taking in the scene. "Whose place is this?" "Mine." The word felt strange on Ethan's tongue. "Bought it 2 weeks ago, been fixing it up since then." Surprise widened her eyes. "You bought land? I thought you were just staying to help Samuel with the cattle." Ethan shifted in his saddle. "That was the plan, but plans change." He met her gaze directly. "I've been moving for so long, Olivia, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. But these past months, being here with you, with Samuel and Clara, it's made me want something different." Understanding dawned on her face. "You're staying, permanently. If you'll stay with me." The words came out before he could reconsider them. "Not right away. I know you need time and this is all sudden, but someday when you're ready." Olivia's expression softened. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Ethan Nash?" He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you might consider a future where we face it together. Where this land becomes a home for both of us." Tears welled in her eyes, catching the afternoon sunlight. "I've been so afraid to hope for a normal life again. After everything that happened, it seemed like too much to ask for." "You deserve every happiness," Ethan said firmly. "And if I can be part of that happiness, I'd count myself the luckiest man in the territory." Olivia urged her horse forward until she was alongside him. "Show me this home of yours, Ethan. Let me see if I can picture myself there." They rode down to the cabin, and Ethan watched nervously as Olivia explored the modest rooms. She ran her fingers along the shelves he'd built, tested the sturdiness of the table, peered out the freshly glazed windows at the view of the mountains. "You did all this yourself?" she asked, turning to face him. "Wanted it to be right. For you." He hadn't meant to admit that, but the words slipped out anyway. Olivia crossed the room to stand before him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "No man has ever built something with his own hands for me before. I'd build you a palace if I could," he said honestly. "This is just a start." She smiled, reaching up to touch his cheek. "This is better than any palace. This is real." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And so is what I feel for you, Ethan. It scares me sometimes, how much I've come to care for you." The admission sent a rush of warmth through him. Carefully, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Ethan leaned down and brushed his lips against hers. It was their first kiss, gentle and questioning. Olivia responded by sliding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I'll take that as a yes," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. Olivia laughed, the sound echoing in the cabin that would soon be their home. Yes, Ethan Nash. Yes to staying. Yes to building a life here. Yes to facing whatever comes together. They returned to the Carson Ranch as the sun was setting, their newfound understanding a warm secret between them. Over supper that night, Ethan shared his news about purchasing the Miller property, though he kept the full extent of his plans with Olivia private for now. Samuel raised his eyebrows knowingly, but said nothing beyond offering his congratulations and promising to help move Ethan's few belongings to the new place the following day. Clara, however, was more perceptive. After the meal, while the men stepped outside to smoke, she cornered Olivia in the kitchen. "Something's changed," she said, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "You're practically glowing." Olivia blushed but couldn't suppress her smile. "Ethan asked me to consider a future with him." "At his new place." Clara clapped her hands in delight. "I knew it. Samuel owes me $1. At Olivia's questioning look, she explained, "We had a friendly wager on how long it would take him to come to his senses. I said before the first snow." "We're taking it slowly," Olivia cautioned. "There's still so much we don't know about each other." "But you love him," Clara said simply. It wasn't a question. Olivia nodded, the admission easier with Clara than it had been with Ethan himself. "I do. It happened so gradually I didn't notice until it was already done." "The best loves are like that," Clara said, squeezing her hand. "They grow so naturally you can't pinpoint when they began. Makes them stronger, I think." The weeks that followed were a time of transition and growing closeness. Ethan moved into his cabin but spent most evenings at the Carson place, gradually courting Olivia in a way neither had experienced before. They took long rides together, talked for hours by the fire, and shared increasingly passionate kisses when they could find moments alone. By December, with snow blanketing the valley and Christmas approaching, Ethan knew he was ready to take the next step. He rode into town one crisp morning and visited the small jewelry shop, where he selected a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. "For your sweetheart," the jeweler asked as he wrapped the purchase. "For the woman I hope to marry," Ethan replied, the words no longer causing the panic they once might have. He planned to propose on Christmas Eve, when Samuel and Clara had invited them for a special dinner. The occasion seemed fitting for beginning their life together officially. But fate had other plans. 3 days before Christmas, as a heavy snow fell outside, Clara's labor began a month earlier than expected. The doctor was summoned from town, but the worsening storm made travel difficult, and it became clear he might not arrive in time. Olivia took charge of the situation with a calmness that impressed Ethan. She had helped deliver a neighbor's baby back in Kansas, she explained, and while she was no midwife, she knew the basics. "Boil water," she instructed Ethan, rolling up her sleeves, "and find all the clean linens you can." For the next 6 hours, Ethan and Samuel paced outside the bedroom door, wincing at Clara's cries and following Olivia's occasional instructions for more hot water or clean towels. As night fell and the storm raged outside, Ethan found himself praying for the first time in years for Clara, for the baby, and for Olivia's steady hands. Shortly before midnight, a new cry joined the howling of the wind, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. When Olivia finally emerged from the bedroom, her face was tired but triumphant. "A boy," she announced. "Small but strong. They're both doing well." Samuel burst into tears of relief and gratitude, crushing Olivia in a bear hug before rushing to his wife's side. Ethan remained behind, staring at Olivia with newfound awe. "You were amazing," he said when they were alone. "I've never seen anything like it." Olivia smiled wearily, sinking onto a chair. Life finds a way even in the harshest conditions. She looked down at her blood-stained apron. "I should clean up. Wait." Ethan knelt before her, taking her hands in his. This wasn't how he'd planned it. There was no romantic dinner, no carefully rehearsed speech. But watching her bring a new life into the world, seeing her strength and compassion, had filled him with a certainty that couldn't wait for perfect circumstances. "Marry me," he said simply. "I know this isn't the romantic proposal you deserve, but after what I just witnessed, I can't wait another day to ask you to be my wife." Surprise widened Olivia's eyes, followed quickly by tenderness. "You want to propose now, when I'm covered in blood and sweat?" "I want to propose because you're covered in blood and sweat," Ethan corrected. "Because you just helped bring a new life into the world with your bare hands. Because you're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life by your side." Tears filled Olivia's eyes as Ethan reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box he'd been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. He opened it to reveal the pearl ring. "Olivia Parker, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" She nodded, unable to speak through her tears, and extended her trembling hand. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he'd never let go. They were married 2 months later in the small church in Pine Valley. Clara, fully recovered from the birth, stood as Olivia's witness, little Thomas cradled in her arms. Samuel stood beside Ethan, grinning broadly as his friend finally took the step he'd been encouraging for months. Olivia wore a dress of pale blue, sewn by her own hands, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Ethan thought she had never looked more beautiful than she did walking toward him down the short aisle, her face alight with joy and promise. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows simple and heartfelt. As they exchanged rings, Ethan had commissioned a matching band for himself. He was struck by how far they had both come from that dusty road where he'd found her broken and nearly defeated. "I take you as my husband to have and to hold from this day forward," Olivia said, her voice clear and strong. "For better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death parts us." As the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan felt a sense of completion he'd never known before. The wandering cowboy who had spent his life avoiding permanent connections had finally found his home not in a place, but in the heart of the woman before him. The celebration afterward was held at their cabin, which they had furnished together over the previous months. Friends from town and neighboring ranches joined them, bringing gifts and good wishes. There was music and dancing, food and laughter that stretched long into the night. When the last guests had departed and they were finally alone as husband and wife, Ethan took Olivia's hands in his. "Happy?" he asked softly. She smiled up at him, all the love she felt shining in her eyes. "More than I ever thought possible." She touched his cheek gently. "You saved my life that day, Ethan. But more than that, you showed me that there was still good in the world, still reasons to hope and dream and love." "You saved me too," he confessed. "I was just drifting, never letting myself get close to anyone. You gave me a reason to stop running." That night, as they lay together in the bed they would share for decades to come, Ethan marveled at the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. A chance encounter on a dusty trail, a decision to stop rather than ride on, a beaten woman's courage in the face of cruelty, all had converged to create this new beginning. Spring brought new life to their land. The cattle Ethan and Samuel had purchased began to calve. The garden Olivia planted began to sprout, and the news that she was expecting their first child filled their home with fresh joy and anticipation. As Ethan watched his wife's body change with their growing child, he was sometimes struck by the memory of finding her broken and bleeding. The contrast between that desperate day and the peaceful happiness they now shared was a constant reminder of life's capacity for renewal and redemption. Their daughter, Emma Clara Nash, was born on a warm September day, with Clara returning the favor of assistance that Olivia had provided months earlier. As Ethan held his newborn daughter, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger, he felt a love so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "She's perfect," he whispered, placing the swaddled infant in Olivia's arms, "just like her mother." Life settled into the rhythms of the seasons. The Nash-Carson cattle operation grew steadily, as did both families. A son, Samuel James, joined Emma 2 years later, and the Carson family welcomed a daughter the following summer. The children grew up together, cousins in all but blood, racing across the connected properties and learning the ways of ranch life. Ethan taught them to ride and rope, while Olivia instilled in them her love of books and learning, teaching them their letters before they were old enough for the small school in town. Through it all, the bond between Ethan and Olivia deepened and strengthened. The trials they had each faced before finding one another had taught them to value the simple joys of everyday life: shared meals, quiet conversations by the fire, the laughter of their children, the satisfaction of work well done. On the 10th anniversary of the day Ethan had found Olivia on that dusty road, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple. Their children played in the yard, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. "You ever think about him?" Ethan asked quietly. "Jenkins." Olivia was silent for a moment before answering. "Sometimes, less often now." She leaned against her husband's solid strength. "I heard he died in a gunfight in Tucson 3 years ago." Ethan nodded, having heard the same news but choosing not to share it until Olivia was ready to discuss it. "Does it bring you peace, knowing he's gone?" "My peace came long before his death," she said simply. "The day you found me, when I realized that his cruelty wasn't the end of my story." She turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the same love they had shown on their wedding day. "You gave me a future when I thought mine was over, Ethan. Everything since then has been a gift I never expected to receive." Ethan drew her into his arms, still marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "The gift was mine, Olivia. You showed me what it means to be truly strong, not with fists or guns, but with heart and spirit." As darkness fell over the valley, they called home. They called their children in for supper. Gathered around the table Ethan had built with his own hands, in the home they had created together. They shared the simple meal and the not-so-simple love that had transformed two wounded souls into a family. Later, as they lay in each other's arms, Olivia traced the lines that time had begun to etch around Ethan's eyes. "Would you do it again?" she asked softly. "Stop for that broken woman on the trail, knowing everything that would follow." Ethan didn't hesitate. 1,000 times over. He kissed her gently, pouring a decade of love into the gesture. "Finding you was the best decision I ever made." And in the quiet darkness of the home they had built together, surrounded by the life they had created from the ashes of their separate pasts, they held each other close, two souls who had found in each other not just healing, but the kind of love that transforms and endures. The woman who had been beaten for refusing to obey orders, and the cowboy who had found her barely conscious, had become something greater than their individual stories. They had become a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds.